Gang, what's happening, webinar world, people watching a YouTube clip, people seeing Facebook. It doesn't matter how you got here. We're just glad that you're here. My name's Erik Hatch. I live in Fargo, North Dakota, and I'm happily the owner of a handful of companies. The two that I'm probably most connected with or most known for are a real estate company called Hatch Realty and a coaching company called Hatch Coaching. I put my name on everything because I just am not that clever to remember anything else, frankly. And my passion is this community. My passion is making a difference. And I try to do a little bit better every day. And so this is a chance for me to try to do better and try to learn a little bit more and to figure out how I, as a man of privilege, and how I, as a businessman, and how I, as a father, can just do better. Robby, why don't you introduce yourself, talk through how you are sitting here in this awkward, staged living room that we have.
We got to get a bigger couch so we could all fit next time.
Should we just all sit right here?
I mean, we could. That's true. Yeah, we're giving some COVID. We got to be 6 feet apart.
I know. It's like 3.5 feet, but I feel good.
Yeah. Robby, I'm a coach with Erik at Hatch Coaching, and I worked at Hatch Realty for years now, and I'm in a very similar place. I'm excited because we actually shared the stage at a TED Talk. Was that 3 years ago? 2 years ago?
2017, yeah.
2017.
And I just want to point out, like, I've done 2 TED Talks. You've done 1 TED Talk. Fred has done 1 TED Talk. Fred got more views in the last week on his TED Talk than I have on one of my TED Talks total. I'm so happy for you, Fred.
Yeah, no jealousy at all.
Oh, dude.
But really honored to have you here today to learn and really learn how we can be better as well. And as you said, I think privilege is something that I didn't really fully recognize, and I'm excited to learn from you. So I'm looking forward to that.
And joining us as the awkward guy in between Robby and I as we flank you right now is Fred Edwards. And Fred and I got to know each other 3 years ago in the Masters of Success program at NDSU, which is actually, who's behind the camera right now is a gal named Jess Tubner. You can't see her, but she's fantastic. I met her in 2016 at the Masters of Success program at NDSU. And so she helped to put on an event. And I told her, I'm like, hey, if you're ever looking for a job, come and talk to me. And she did. And we hired her. And Fred, if you're ever looking for a job, come and talk to me. Okay, so I'm just going to put that out there right now.
Wow.
We had you. I'm not even letting you talk yet. Look at me just hogging the microphone. We had you on my radio show last week.
Yeah.
Found out that you and your girl are wanting to get married. I offered to marry you as well. I'm putting a lot of offers out there, Fred.
Just resources, providing resources.
Yeah, when you're online certified, it's a big deal. And so Robby and I help to lead our coaching company, and we live in the real estate world, but really we want to just redefine how people treat people. It in fact is the mission statement of our company, is to redefine how people treat people. And with that, Fred, you are a fascinating man. You are one of the people that I look up to in this community on a really high level because of the way in which you handle really difficult situations and the character that you do. And like, I'm so impressed with you. So tell people who are new to Frederick Edwards Jr. Walk us through, man.
So first, I want to say thank you. I watched the last video that we did together, and I didn't say thank you too much when it was good compliments because I don't know how to take compliments sometimes.
You just say, you're right. Yeah, that's all you have to say.
But I am Frederick Edwards Jr. I'm a public speaker, a motivational speaker. I care about personal development, going from a fixed mindset to a growth mindset, a community educator. I'm out in the community. I'm working with One Fargo and Black Lives Matter right now to get a lot of things going in our community, to push forward, to push inclusion, to push a lot of things, honestly. Currently the graduate assistant for the Office of Multicultural Programs at NDSU. Currently about to be a father, so a lot of hats to fill right now.
The one that matters most is that father hat.
Yep.
So Robby turned 30 yesterday, and he has 3 kids. He has 3 kids. I have 2 kids at the age of 40. You're 24.
Yep.
About to be a father. How old were you when Jossie was born?
Oh, gosh, that was 6 years ago now, so 24?
Yeah, you were 24. What advice can you give Fred? Because I wasn't a father until I was like 35 years old.
Oh, man. I mean, the biggest thing I tell everyone is you don't realize how much time you actually had to do things until a kid comes into the picture. So
yeah, kiss your free time goodbye.
Free time's goodbye, man. I mean, 5 a.m.s are every morning now for me, which is honestly, it's something that you have to get disciplined with. And you're someone who loves the growth mindset, so you're going to take advantage of it, I'm sure. But dude, so much joy with kids, and the best thing that's ever happened to me, hands down.
I recognize that we just did that like really lame thing, and that is, let's immediately give somebody advice that didn't ask for it. Yeah. That is such a. I do that far too often. It's like, because I'm a coach, right? I live in this time where I give advice all the time, and it's not even asked for. And we're even doing a webinar right now. Unfortunately, the people that are watching are actually like choosing to hear this advice. Like they're saying, I want to learn more about this, but otherwise it's just unwarranted. I just give it out all the time. And I want to take the next 45 minutes to an hour, Fred, and I want you to give us advice.
Absolutely.
And I want you to say to us, guys, this is how you can do better, because frankly, I can say proudly like I'm not racist. And then as I look into it, it's like, no, we all have our bigotries and we all have our things.
Yeah.
And I just want to be better. And it's not just being not racist, it's actually being anti-racist. And I want to start understanding what that means and what that looks like. So before we dive into that meaty stuff, I want to paint a really colorful picture of the worldview that you have compared to the worldview that I have, because I grew up as a poor kid in Fargo. I had a single parent home. I didn't have the best opportunities in life, and yet I consistently had advantages over a lot of people. And Fargo was about the whitest place on earth, whiter than the snow that's here. It's more. I mean, my wife is an elementary school teacher now, and she has about half her class as people of color, and it's different than what I grew up in. And so my wife is teaching me things. You're teaching me things, and help me understand. Let's paint that picture of Fred's life from birth until today, because you're the 10th kid. Like, your parents ran out of names, so you just got your dad's name. Yeah. You know what I mean?
Literally.
Yeah, because you're Frederick Edwards Jr., right? They're like, yeah, we're tired. It's just, honey, what's your name? Okay, yeah, give it to him.
Right.
So walk us through your life, some of the challenges, the things that you've seen, the things that you felt good and bad.
I would say growing up, like, we lived in a shelter. I think that's important for a lot of people to understand that sometimes you don't get housing, sometimes you don't have the financial services to do those things. And so
why were you in a shelter?
I was in a shelter because my mother and father were kind of going through things, so my mom couldn't support all of us financially. So shelter is a good place to go, because they'll make sure that you're housed, you're fed, your kids go to school, all those type of things.
So how long did you live in a shelter?
It was like intermediate. Sometimes we would live with our cousins, sometimes we would live in a shelter, sometimes we would get an apartment. So it was kind of like, it was never one full go. So I would say probably like 2 years living in a shelter altogether.
How old were you when that happened?
I could say we probably lived in a shelter when I was 3. We probably lived in a shelter when I was like 7, and then a little bit maybe when I got a little bit older.
What did that do to your self-worth, living in a shelter?
For me, I was just always confused on why we had to go to a shelter. Because for me, I seen other people in those shelters, and I was like, our family dynamic is not like these other family dynamics. And so I always wondered why we lived in a shelter, but then I also seen later on in life that you couldn't go to those shelters with your husband. You couldn't go to those shelters with a man. And so it was kind of a requirement for you to be a single mother to get into those shelters. And so
what would your dad do at those times?
My dad has always just been in the church. So like he always like either lived at a church or kind of helped volunteer at churches and stuff like that. So he was always serving, most definitely.
Okay. And then what did your parents do for work?
So my mom, she's like a fraud detection. Like, she did like a whole bunch of stuff with money and things of that sort. And now she does like probation officer type things and helps people in halfway homes, people with serious crimes, right? And so my father, he does like prison ministry. He's an apostle. He served in a church for about 10 years in Chicago, Illinois, on the south side. And so now he's back in Minneapolis around my mom. And so.
Well, your parents aren't married now?
They've always been married, and then they would go like separated kind of to and from, but I've never seen my mom or dad with anybody else. So
yeah. Well, I'm probably asking you some pretty interesting family dynamic questions.
Yeah.
And Mama Edwards, Papa Edwards, God bless you. I love that you served your family and served your church as well. Those are obviously things that are really important to all of us.
Yeah.
But being the youngest of 10, what was that like?
Being the youngest of 10 it forced me to grow up early. After a certain age, there was no Christmas presents. After a certain age, there was no re-explaining everything. It was like, I'm gonna sit y'all down at this one time and let y'all know the real world situations that's going on. And Junior, you might be 4 or 5 years younger than your brothers and sisters, but you need to be prepared for this information.
So your family calls you as Junior?
Yeah, Junior.
Okay.
J-Bo, Junior, Uncle Bo, J-Bo, Junior Bo, Lil Boy.
So do you have nieces and nephews that are around your age?
No. My
Okay.
oldest niece and nephew are 12 and 13 right now. They are taller than me, though.
Okay, well. Some of us are blessed with height, and that's why I keep moving here, is because I can't get comfortable on this tiny little couch. It's great. Robbie took the chair, but this is still squishy, so I like that.
Yeah.
So what was your worldview growing up, Fred? Being in a family of 10 in North Minneapolis and living with maybe one foot in the poverty bucket sometimes.
Right.
That must give a really interesting worldview.
So for me, I grew up never being able to call my brothers and sisters stepbrothers and sisters. Like, I never even knew what a stepbrother and sister was until I went to school, and people started asking even more questions about my family dynamics. And so both of my parents were married actually before they met each other.
Oh, sure.
So they both had a set of kids, and then they had a set of kids with us. So that's 10 altogether. But I always viewed all of them as my brothers and sisters. Right. There was no step. There was no, like, kind of brother. There was none of that. Like, I never had that institution in my life. Like, I didn't know about what a stepbrother or sister was, so they've always
why is that? Because, like, I had 2 stepsisters growing up, and granted, my dad was never really in my life, but I knew I had a couple stepsisters, and they were identified as, like, these are stepsisters. You know, they are not from the same bloodline.
Yeah, I think it was a sense of ostracizing people. It's just like when you say a second cousin, like, they're just not as close as the first cousin, even though you might have that same relationship built. It's just words to ostracise people, to push people and let them know that they are not in first in command with that. And so
inclusion was a theme in your family.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
With an unintentional inclusion word put on it, right?
Yeah, my biggest sister, she can pass for being
Careful
white.
to call your sister the biggest sister. Okay, your oldest. There you go.
My oldest sister.
You're teaching me a lot of things today, but I'm here teaching you that
there
one.
We go.
Like,
there we go.
Watch that. Watch your mouth.
So my oldest sister, she could pass for being white. Talithia, she has freckles. My father is very light. He's not as light as you, but he is very light. Like,
I'm like opaque. Okay,
right.
like, yeah. There's.
I'll show you a picture of him. He's lighter than Malcolm X. So
okay, all right.
You get the picture. And so my first sister, she had like this white passing complexion, and so her experiences of being black was different than mine's, right? And so for me, developing and growing up, I always had these different perceptions of what black people look like. My older brother, he's light skinned. I got brothers who are darker than me, lighter than me. Yeah. And so there was no one color, but we all look the same in the face. So It was just that idea that you can't ostracize people and that black people are not all the same. I think that was so important in my family, was that there is no monolithic to us. Like, if you want to do this, this has nothing to do with the rest of us, like, do you.
Growing up in school, were you, as a black kid, were you in the majority or the minority?
So I grew up going to school in North Minneapolis, but then I was also going to school in Northeast. These were predominantly black or Latinx or indigenous people populations, and so I grew up around lots of different cultures: Somali refugees, Ethiopian people, Sudanese people. Like, I grew up embedded into that culture, and so I grew up in a predominantly black or colored society. And then when I went to middle school, that was private school, middle school, predominantly white. That was where I was like, oh crap, like, this is a way different world.
Way to catch your language there, first of all. Like, yeah, I saw that almost slip out. And it's, dude, if you're being real and you swear, that's fine. Robbie dropped an F-bomb in his interview like 7 years ago, and I still hired him. So
there you go.
Yeah.
You don't have to worry about it.
Yeah. So what was that like in middle school then? All of a sudden being surrounded by a bunch of white kids that you hadn't really been exposed to before? Because
I think I immediately moved towards hatred for certain groups of people. So, like, black people who didn't operate like the black people that I knew, like this idea that all black people are the same, like, they cared more for white acceptance than they did being true to who they were, or they cared more about, like, being accepted by the people in the class than they did about learning about their culture, learning about their history. It was like, since a little kid, I've always been that rebel. I've always been that one who cared about my history, cared about people knowing the truth. And so I I was like my own person for a long time. I was a bully. I was bitter. Like, that's what I tell kids with Dead Compassion. It's like, I was a bitter kid. I was angry. I was mad about all these different things going on. And I would take that pain out on other black people who didn't know about being black. Like, I would take that out on them.
So you were more frustrated with other black people than you were white people? Or, I mean...
They were more damaging because they would play like, okay, now I can be your friend, but then when it comes to being around all these people, I'm going to do the same thing that white people do, where I agree with this white person's opinion and say like, oh, they don't mean to be racist. Like, they defend this person right away, this white saviorism. But it's like, a lot of times I was always in that situation where I was on the other side. And then it's like, you pick and choose when you want to, you know, understand culture. You pick and choose when you want to care about what's going on in the community. And so for me, it was like, I was angry and upset about it. But then at the end of the day, after I started to come to these people's houses, look at their experiences, look at the things that they had went through in life, they had a completely different environment and nurturing program than I did.
Mm-hmm. So your cultural upbringing, did it have to do more with who you were surrounded with or your skin color? Because that's one of the big debates that's out there right now, and your experience maybe is different than someone else.
Yeah.
But did your worldview come from being a young black man, or did it come from being a kid that grew up in North Minneapolis? Or is it both?
It's both. I think I got asked this question by my girlfriend. She asked me like, when did you know that you were black? Or when did you like start to recognize like race or color? And it was like, I always knew that. Like, since I was a little kid, I could tell by how other kids got picked up in daycare. I could tell by other kids what they, like the treats, the mannerisms that they got taught, all these different things. Like, I just always thought I was ugly. Like, I just figured there was something ugly about me going on, or that I gave off a vibe. And as a young kid, even like, I remember even in first grade and kindergarten, like I was getting suspended from school, like telling my teacher, like I literally said, "Fuck 2-bit," like trying to curse her out because I felt like she was treating me wrong, right? And my teacher telling my mom, like, yeah, your son cursed me out. And then she's like, well, what did he say? Because she knew that I couldn't speak fully yet. And so she said what I had tried to say, and then my mom was like, well, he didn't technically say anything, but she understood what I was trying to say. So she took care of me later on. But
your inability to put words together properly got you out of a couple of hot messes.
Right.
My son Simon, who's 3, isn't great with his words either. But if he said "fut 2-bit," as you just said, Simon would be in some trouble. Yeah.
Yeah. So as a young person, I had already developed that these were black and brown kids, that we look different than a lot of the white kids coming into our schools. And so the teachers kind of treated us slightly differently as well. And so that was where I was kind of like, even now I care so much about education, because I feel as though people of color need to be in institutional methods. Because my first experience with a black educator was Mr. McKizak in 5th grade at Jenny Lynn. And he would have me come into his 5th grade class and stand in a corner, like, to punish me because none of the teachers could deal with me. But in reality, they were just so afraid of being called racist. They were afraid of, you know, feeling like they were picking on me. But I was a bad kid. I was a knucklehead. But he knew how to transform my mind in a way where he was like, all these other people are going to give you excuses. All these other people are not going to be hard on you. You know, they're going to try to protect themselves. But at the end of the day, like, he really cared for me and pushed me forward a lot of times. I don't even know where that dude is right now. I hope he's doing good.
Facebook is that thing that can have you look up a lot of middle-aged people.
Right,
yeah,
right.
You find them all over. Yeah. So I have just a ton of questions, and I know Robby does too. So this may bounce all around, and we're gonna talk in some great depth about what it means to be an anti-racist. But I need to understand your experiences first before we really dive in. Help me understand this, Fred. Are people afraid of, you referenced those teachers that were afraid of being labeled as racist, but you were just a jerk kid,
right,
who happened to be black.
Right.
How does somebody approach somebody that's a jerk kid that is black and see their color and respect that while still challenging them and helping them to get better? Because we're all so afraid of doing the wrong thing right now.
Right.
I'm scared to death of what to do. My nephew is adopted and a black kid, and we are so conscious right now of what we need to do to help Miles out. And right now, how do we gingerly walk about this, but how do we show so much respect that accountability is love? You
Right.
know what I mean? How do we get past that fear of our own racism and bigotries and really show up and love and have challenging, hard conversations?
Right. So I think about the teachers in the inner city schools, right? White teachers in inner city schools, they have to be educated on what's going on currently, but also on the history. And so last time we talked, I talked about, you know, in order for our country to move forward, we have to have resistance and love. So there has to be that love area, but then there has to be that sensitive thug. And so it's like when you play football and they do like a read option and you put the ball in there, like you got to be kind of strong with it, but you got to also be soft with it. So a sensitive thug in a way is like being stern with them, understanding like has nothing to do with race. Like you're trying to make this a race thing. This has nothing to do with race. These things have to do with race, but this right here doesn't have to do with race. Like they will let you know, because at the end of the day, kids, they understand those fears and they understand those dynamics, and so they use that in a way, because at the end of the day, a lot of teachers haven't confronted their own racist issues, their own racist identities, and so they just deny that it's happening. And so in order to face and confront what's really going on with that kid, a lot of people have to face what was going on inside themselves. And the ones that didn't would just shy away from it because they don't even want to have that discussion.
Fred, I want to talk about white privilege. You came with some resources. Here we go.
Yeah.
White privilege is really interesting. And you said something on my radio show last week that has stuck with me, and it's actually led me to some action. I have a guy I went to high school with, and he is a keyboard warrior.
Okay. Like on Facebook.
Yeah, totally
Got you.
is.
Got you.
Totally is. And he had made some sort of post about how he had said societal and systemic racism don't exist. And so that was his first comment. And I read it, and I'm like, man, screw this guy. I'm so tired of his stance. And then I'm like, okay, I got to figure this out. I got to lean in a little bit more. And so you had challenged me. You said, don't unfriend and don't block those people, but instead engage in the conversation.
Yeah.
Because they're going to listen to me more than they're going to listen to you.
Right.
You know? And
100%.
so I must have retyped like 5 times and finally got something out there. And it didn't cause like an uproar, which made me say, like, was I just too soft about it? Because like I vehemently disagree with you, and you're like, hey, thanks for your thoughts. Like, where did that come from? Because if somebody just says thanks for your thoughts, they're like, yeah, you didn't make much of a point. And then he posted yesterday something that just lit a fire under me, and I went to block him. I went to just shut that noise off. Then I have Fred Edwards in my head being like, dude, don't do that. Like, engage in the conversation. I'm exhausted as a white man engaging in that conversation.
Yeah.
How are you doing?
Emotional labor is something that's very real, and a lot of people don't like to talk about it, but through slavery, through Jim Crow, you weed out a lot of weak black people because they just die out, like literally. So I feel like in my genome, like in my build is this idea that emotional labor is a part of who I am. You know, responding to injustices is a part of who I am, like undoubtedly. And so when I hear stories like this, right, it reminds me of my friend Morley Mathewson. He was my quarterback in high school. He's in Bozeman, Montana right now. And it was about him and 2 other people protesting in Bozeman, right? And he called me, he was crying. He was like, man, bro, like this is so hard. Like literally, like this is, it's tough, not because like I want to give up, but it's tough because people are just looking at me like I'm an idiot, like they don't understand what I'm saying. It's just going over their head. And I was just like, that is genuine, you know, that is honest. That is what a lot of black people who have lived in predominantly white societies go through on a daily basis until they learn about their culture, until they learn about their history, until they learn about anti-racism, until they learn about white allies. And so for me, I just think about the lack of history being brought to people like Erik Hatch, right? Because if you had learned about white allies, like the Cornhuskers, the people, the abolitionists who fought, who didn't gain much, right? But they helped with civil rights movements. They helped with the revolution. They helped with pushing people forward. Those people are not in our history because they don't want people to know about the emotional labor that these people went through. They don't want people to know about the sacrifices that these people lost, the businesses that they were ostracized from. All those different things are a part of our history and are also a part of your history. And so the white abolitionists, the white allies, the anti-racist people who were even in the 1700s fighting for white male dominance to not be a thing anymore, those people will never be a part of our history because now we have to approach why were those people fighting for those things, and who were fighting against those people? And so when I think about that emotional labor that you're going through right now, where it's exhausting, there's also this idea that you have to take a break. And so even if this dude is like got all these posts, yada, 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 there's nothing wrong with muting him for being on your post, right? Because he's still going to see your post, and you're still going to see him, his ability to comment, right? There's still that idea for dialogue and discussion, but I wouldn't say engage in toxic conversation, because at the end of the day, if you're arguing with somebody who believes that systemic racism or systematic racism isn't real, you're dealing with somebody who has a denial of reality, right? There's right, wrong, and reality. A lot of people talk about what's right, what's wrong, and then there's reality. Like people are like, oh man, like you shouldn't have to be dealing with all these things. Like that is wrong. Like, aren't you pissed off? Aren't you upset? Aren't you angry? It's like, what can I do with that energy? Like I can sit and hold it and let it, you know, come back and forth, this potential energy, or I can make it very kinetic and I can make it move. And so I feel as though when people have that emotional labor, a lot of times you got to read about other people who have fought the same fights that you're fighting, but you just have to use your brain. You just have to use your fingers, whereas another person had to use their body, whereas another person had to walk out and they had to speak with people who had hate for other people and say, you look just like me, and like you're not doing this right. And that wasn't easy for those people as well. Like there were sit-ins all throughout. North Carolina had sit-ins started, right? And so white students participated in these sit-ins. They were spat on. They had milk poured on them. But those people aren't in our history books because there's a fundamental idea that if we push that racism and race has nothing to do with white people, we can ignore it, we can move past it, we can have all these unsolicited, unwritten rules, right? And so when I hear about the emotional labor from you or from Morley or from any of these people that I'm close with, I know that it is your heart fighting against reality, because you're like, yo, like this is common sense. This isn't like rocket science or anything of that sort. This is literally looking at the statistics educationally, economically, housing, in jails, and in prison, private prisons. Like this is just about looking at the obvious things. And so I think that people, in order to continue living without shame and without guilt, have to deny the reality that they're in.
Ouch. And that's heavy stuff. The post that this classmate of mine made yesterday said, I'm wondering, when do I start receiving my white privilege, and what happens if your color is a little bit darker? You know, if I'm tan in the winter, or tan in the summer, excuse me, do I get less privilege? And so it was really snarky and really difficult. And that white privilege conversation for me is frankly, it's new.
Yeah.
That's one of the things that I think is the hardest to digest right now. And Robby, you're as white as I am, man. Like, you know, we're Fargo, North Dakota, born and raised. And if it wasn't for our wives, Robby's wife is, I'm speaking on your behalf, like your microphone doesn't work or something, you know? Robby's wife is a school counselor. My wife is an elementary school teacher. And so we get stories all the time about some of these things that exist. And I don't think I would have outwardly admitted or even been fully aware up until the last month how much white privilege I have. I feel guilty about that. Robby, do you feel guilty about that?
I wouldn't say guilty. I think it really reinforces the idea that, you know, our silence and the fact that you and I haven't had to worry about this stuff is the epitome of privilege. It reinforces that we're in this place. Thank you. We're in this place of being privileged, because that silence doesn't change anything for us. And I think it absolutely does make me feel guilty, especially hearing you talk about it. It makes me feel frustrated with myself that I haven't leaned into it, right? Lean into conversations like this that are uncomfortable and scary, but fulfilling, you know, in some respects. So I'd say guilty in some respects for sure.
Well, and here's an interesting thought on that is, I mean, we're doing this because this is hopefully the first of a lot of steps to get our guilt into action. Like, I shouldn't be ashamed that I was born white. You shouldn't be ashamed that you were born black.
Correct.
And for 24 years, systemic racism has made you feel at one point or another, and I'm projecting here, but there's probably some shame or some frustration with what you were given, because we're left saying, well, how come I didn't have an easy life like Robby or Erik, or how come I didn't have, and don't get me wrong, you are black and proud, right?
Absolutely.
But there's still that piece inside you, isn't there, Fred, that's like, well, what if it would have been a little different, right?
I think that went away when I used to pray to God and ask him for me to be white, because when I was younger.
That was one of your prayers?
Yeah, it was like, life is okay for white people. They don't have to deal with the same situations I don't have to deal with. There is not heavily policing in their neighborhoods. White pastors make money off of Christianity versus black pastors are broke all the time. And so it's just like, it was like this continuous idea that like life for white people was a lot easier. But then as I was getting older, white people would blame me and say that life is easier for you. You know, you have affirmative action. You have, you know, all these different things changing for you. And it's like more white people benefit from affirmative action than black people do. And so there's all of these kind of things that have been constructed and catered towards black people to help black people out, and then they end up hurting us in the long run. 40 acres and a mule, Freedmen's Bank, the Confederates end up owning that 8 months after giving money to black people and say, yeah, we're going to shut this down. No more agreement to that, right? And so there's all these things where people are like, this is for the benefit of black people, but it benefits white people the most, like racial discrimination cases. Most of those cases benefit, you know, people the most. But then I think about people like Candace Owens, right? I always ask, like, who hurt you? You know, who put you through a situation in which you can't align and evaluate, you know, your race? You can't align and evaluate your culture. And then I think about the fact that she had a racial discrimination case that she won, right? And so she benefited from being a black person, but now she speaks down on black people. And so there's this idea that there's this continuous defense, right, that black people are benefiting from a society and that we need to stop complaining. And then there's this continuous idea that white privilege, we can joke about it and we can say, oh yeah, well, I have my white privilege, da, 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 da. But yet we don't want to go beyond that, right? We don't want to talk about how most white people in Fargo lived in segregated societies. We don't call them segregated societies. We say, I lived in...
It was North Dakota. Yes.
Right.
And unintentionally segregated, yeah.
It was very intentional.
Really?
Yes. North Dakota, South Dakota, if you look at bills of sales, right, for houses, they have bills of sales that go back to 1919, 1859, all these bills of sales, and it would say, don't sell to black people, don't sell to people of color, or this area is for this specific neighborhood of people. And so we have this idea that places like North Dakota are occupied by white people because of choice, because of coldness, and it's like, that's not the reality, because Native Americans and indigenous people occupied this land for hundreds of years before white people came here, and so they were forced out of here, and so they weren't welcomed back in the same way. And so a lot of times people believe that they live in segregated towns unintentionally, right? They believe that they live in segregated cities unintentionally. They believe that suburban areas are made that way because people have money. But then you see black people have tried to occupy lands like Greensboro, North Carolina, right? Or like Florida, how they bombed an entire city of black people, how they bombed places that had banks, how they bombed places that had luxury grocery stores and cars and things of that sort, right? And so there's this idea that if a black person is benefiting or moving forward in life, why complain? Why are they complaining, right? And so for me, it's this idea that's even scarier, because people live in segregated towns, they live in segregated cities, and they say, hey, like, I've never had to worry about race. I've never had to worry about racism. I never had to think about culture. And it's like, are you not white? Is whiteness not a social construct of race? Is not, you know what I'm saying? Is whiteness not a race in America? Is it not how we occupy and approve and disapprove people? And so there's this idea that because I've lived in whiteness my whole life, I don't have to think about race, and that is a genuine lie. Because you are segregated, you have to think about race, because your entire life you have been brought up and reinforced that this is how the world is. When you pull out a dollar bill, this is how the world is. When you pull out, you know what I'm saying, the richest man in America, or the person working the hardest, or if you type in on Google professional haircuts, you're going to see a white man, a white woman. But if you type in unprofessional haircuts or unprofessional people, you're going to see a black man. And so it's just like this idea that because I am segregated, because I believe that I live in a good town, somebody has to live in a not so good town. And so who are those people, right? And so when we talk about certain verbiage and certain language, when we are brought up in these areas where our segregation is not questioned, it is a normalization, it is because we have this idea that white race is innocent. it is innocent of race, right? Whiteness is innocent of race because if we don't have to have these discussions about race and racism, it's because race doesn't matter, right? But in reality, race does matter. And if we had conversations and deep conversations about why our whiteness is the way that it is, I think that people could understand white privilege even bigger. Because at the end of the day, that man on your Facebook post, he's talking about surface level white privilege. He's talking about things that he can tangibly see, right? He's thinking about things that he knows that he benefits from, whereas this is way bigger than him. He can be moved to Australia. He can be moved to China. He can be moved to Japan. He could be moved to Sudan. And he will have a totally different experience than the people who occupy and own that land and are the dominant core cultures in that land because of his whiteness. And so there's this idea that the closer you are to whiteness, the closer you are to acceptance. The closer you are to whiteness, the closer you are to being approved by other people. Just like the Japanese people, when they came here, they were treated differently. They were like, whoa, 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 why are we being treated differently? Why are we being treated like these black people? And they sued the American government, and they literally became their own people, Japanese Americans.
Well, they had concentration camps, you know, like
terrible things happened to them, right? But through the filtration system of life, just like terrible things happen to Irish people, Catholic people were demonized for years. But over time, the filtration system says, well, we can adopt you into the white society. Welcome. Irish people, Japanese people, are, you know what I'm saying? All these people are adopted in, and they say, you're cool, you're good here. Just like if you think about gangbangers and thugs are the worst thing for a person to be as a person of color, right? But if you're a Russian or a German mob boss, somebody who kills people, who threatens the police, who pays people off, you're a hero. Think about Tony Montana, like one of the most prime, evil, sold cocaine and an addictive substance abuse drug to people, and people make him a hero. But Denzel Washington, American gangster, a real person, Frank Lucas, is a demon. He hurted society. He killed all these people, right? And then you see white men who have made tons and tons of money off of political gain, off of all these different things, and it's called white collar crime. What is a black collar crime? You know what I'm saying? And so there's these ideas that white privilege manifests in things way deeper than just his surface level, what I think I benefit from.
I think that totally hits on a point when he said that white crime through mob bosses like the Italians, people that are defaulted to be white, it's glamorized.
Right.
It's celebrated. And there's how many different shows that you can think of, The Sopranos and all these different shows that glamorize what they've done. And then it's, you know, a black mobster is ignored.
Right.
That's a huge point I guess I had never really thought of. And you're absolutely right about that. And I think the biggest thing that's clicking in all of this is the absolute truth that the default is white.
Yeah.
Little things like the haircut, and those are things that I don't even think about.
Is that white privilege? Is just that the default is white, and
that's not necessarily, I wouldn't say that's all of white privilege. I think that is a very big caveat of what white privilege does, is it pushes the normalization that whiteness is superior, right? I think that's what white privilege is that it pushes the superiority of white people. And so that is a part of that.
Okay. So let me, I want to circle back because you said so many powerful things, Fred. You had mentioned North Dakota and South Dakota that there were bills of sale that said you can't sell to black people.
Absolutely.
That was obviously creating intentional segregation.
Yes.
I was born in 1980 in Fargo with unintentional biases, right? I was brought up in a community that has been segregated intentionally, but I don't intend to be that.
Right.
How do I say then that I'm lost a little bit with that, Fred, because like, how does that catapult me to a privileged place when it was something that I didn't ask for, you know?
Right. I think that's the biggest thing of privilege. Like as a man, like us three are men, we didn't ask for the privileges that come with being a man. It's just there. And we don't fight against a lot of them because at the end of the day, we don't have to question it. And so I think that was something for me as a man that I had to take into accountability, is that I had privileges myself that I could just ignore. I could hear about the wealth gap between women and men and be like, dang, that's messed up. But, or just have these excuses. And I think a lot of times when we say, I didn't ask to be raised in this neighborhood, that is very much correct. That is 100% truth. And I value people who want to bring their kids and their society, people up in society, and bring them to neighborhoods that are great and well. However, suburban areas push black people out of them, right? Suburban areas are not always welcoming to black people. And so there's this idea that you may live in a society that is very nice, the neighborhood is very nice, you didn't ask for the segregation, but the segregation is there. But then if a person of color moves there, they don't get the same interactions, they don't get the same benefits of the doubt, they don't get the same, I was jogging around the neighborhood, that this other person might get, right? But the opposite of verse, if a white person moves into a person of color's neighborhood, the only time that white people and black people can occupy the same land for a while of time is in urban communities, right? But if white people don't want black people there anymore, then they gentrify that neighborhood. And then they make it where people of color can't live there. And so then they occupy that land, and now that's theirs. And so we just think about things like the Rondo neighborhoods in St. Paul, right? St. Paul, Minnesota had Rondo neighborhoods, predominantly black society. They got all these things going on, black businesses, over 700 homes, all these different things, right? And then white people in the suburbs were like, hey, we need to get downtown. Where could we draw a route, a highway, I-94, to get downtown? They decided to put it through the black neighborhood, right? All these people lost homes, all these people lost jobs, all these people lost all these different things, and they're relocated into different areas for the convenience of these people in the suburbs. And so for me, it's like, you don't ask for better schools, you don't ask for better neighborhoods, but you don't push for other people to have those things. And so it's kind of like, I feel bad about people getting paid less than me, but I won't say anything about it. I won't do anything about it because it's not in my control, and it's not 100% in our control. But we
So
still
Fred,
have.
I feel bad about racism.
Yeah.
What is in my control?
What is in your control? Penetrating the hearts of people who might not talk to people like me, right? They already have that defensive up, things of that sort. And then educating yourself is in your control. I genuinely hate when people in North Dakota tell me that they don't know anything about race, that they need to have a conversation with me to understand about race. I've had over 170 people inbox me on Facebook like, hey, can we have a conversation? Hey, can we have coffee? Hey, I will buy you dinner if we can I just want to pick your brain, right? And it's this idea that I am the black encyclopedia now. I am when you had African American studies in college, when you had I have over 100 resources for people if they want them, right? And so for me, when people use the excuse that they didn't know about race or that they didn't know what to do with race, I asked them, what about your adopted black kid? What about the adopted black kids that lived in all white societies? They had the same opportunities to learn about race as a white person. And they did the time, they invested energy into those things because they knew that it was important to understand who they were. And I think for us, a lot of people don't see the importance of understanding black Americans because we are second-class citizens. At the end of the day, when you think of an American, you think of a white person. But in my mind, indigenous people are what I think of when I think of American.
Absolutely.
And so,
Absolutely.
The excuses of people who are past 18 years old to say, I don't know about race, I've lived in a segregated society my entire life, I've never been exposed to any of these different things, I say that you have chosen that. Like, you have chosen to ignore what is going on. Because at some point in time, if you know somebody is committing a crime and you continually help them pick them up to get rides, do all these different things, feed them, do all of that, you are also condoning what they are doing because you are helping them do that. That's just like a parent when they got tough love for their kid and they like, man, you keep messing around like you was a knucklehead, like you're not finna be doing this in my house, right? There is not that attitude for white people when it comes to injustices in America. Like, you're not gonna be doing that in my house. That will not be allowed here. This house is America, right? The house is, we all have to occupy this land. You all have kids that are brought up in this land. And it first starts in the home, where people learn about racism, where people learn about the mannerisms, where people learn about who to bring and who not to bring, right? There's this book called Learning Their First Experience of Being White. Like this girl, she brings her teacher home because he's helped her all, like 2 years of her life. He's helped her, you know what I'm saying? And the parents are like, thank you for inviting your teacher to dinner. So the teacher comes there, they have dinner, and when they leave, the parents are just so distraught and disappointed in the child. And she's like, what did I do wrong? Like, what's wrong? She was like, you didn't let us know that this teacher was black, right? And so at 6th grade, this child is already formulated in your mind who had trust in her parent that this somehow brought a distrust, that somehow this brought an unwelcoming spirit from my parent, right? Or if you were to bring a black person to a barbecue, and then you can see, they don't know this because this is their first interaction with white people, but you can see that your family is tense. You can see that your family is afraid. You can see that your family is not talking like they usually do out of fear, right? And it's just like, you learn and understand, well, maybe I shouldn't bring people of color around because it makes my family uncomfortable, even though my family are good people, right? And so there's this idea that we have to get across that racism is not about a bad person. It's not about an individual act. It's not about individual experiences. Racism is embedded into our society. It is literally woven into everything that we do. And so when people are like, what can I do? The biggest thing that you can do is read. And I got a lot of resources for you. I got a whole bunch of books. But the number one thing is White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack by Peggy McIntosh. It's just a YouTube video. Like, you can just type it in on YouTube.
Say that again.
White Privilege.
And I'm amazed at your eyeyesight because I'm looking at that right now.
Yeah.
Like, that's some superpower that you have because it's like size 9 fonts. And
Exactly.
I'm struggling. Yeah.
11. Yeah. So, yeah, educating yourself is important. You utilizing resources about racial inequality and biases. And so, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack, you can type it in on YouTube. It's White Privilege, Unpacking the Invisible Knapsack. And so, it's an activity that you can do. You can do it on your own. There's racial bias tests that you can type in from Harvard University and all these different places. And so, I'm not really one person to get into implicit bias because implicit bias it's universal, but as far as understanding where you stand when it comes to racism and those things, I think that is important for people to wrap their mind around. And that's why I say read books, because when you read stuff and you're like, ooh, I never knew this, or ooh, I never heard this term before, or ooh, I don't agree with that, like I don't do that as a white person, those are you formulating a foundation and a basis where when you speak to a kid of color and they're like, man, like you only doing this because I'm black. You don't respond to them, I have a black friend, like my black best friend is black, so why would I do that? You respond like, this is the experience, this is what happened, this is what was said, the action, and this is how we can go from there. Not what people meant, not the intentions or things of that sort, but letting the kid know, like, this is what I said. There's nothing racist about this, you know what I'm saying? But really deliberating because you have the education process, like, no, you're making this something that it isn't. And so a lot of times I think what ends up happening is we get people who say like blue lives matter. We get people who say all lives matter, or you guys don't know the full story. And so there's an automatic assumption that the white person didn't do anything wrong. Whereas you won't get that with a kid of color. You won't get that with a person of color. Laquan McDonald was 12 years old when he was shot by the police. And you have people demonizing this 12-year-old boy who have 12-year-olds of their own because they don't see 12-year-old black boys as boys. They see them as men. And so there's this idea that if you are afraid to talk to a black boy, if you are afraid to look racist, it's because you aren't dealing with the things that are going on in your own personal life to feel, you know, the racism. And so earlier you talked about shame versus guilt. And for me, I think shame is an inside thing, personal things develop, whereas guilt is feeling bad about something on the outside. And so for me, I tell people all the time, white guilt doesn't save lives. Like, you can feel bad, you can feel sorry, like, I don't want any money. Like, people have been messaging me like, hey man, emotional labor, I just want to give you some money. Like, I don't want that. That's not my value. That's not my goal.
I will take that if some people are looking to give money. I just want to throw that out there.
Right. And so for me, it's bigger than money. Like, it's always been bigger than money. Like, I don't want to sit at a table if I'm fed scraps. I don't want to be on your book club or in your meeting, have dialogue with you if I have to silence myself and silence, you know, me understanding what is going on in our society. And so what can white people do about race? I got a whole bunch of resources for you. I got articles, I got books.
And we're gonna take those resources and we will post those links and whatnot instead of just reading and telling people, because great resources are huge on this. And so thank you for compiling some of those for us. Fred, are you racist?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Absolutely.
Because I've heard the message, and it comes from, again, white people, is like, well, this is bull crap. How come we're called racist when these biases exist from everybody? And it's like, it's this immediate deflection of like, well, somebody else's sin is also there, so I'm not going to recognize my own sin.
Right. Right.
I saw a post. I spend too much time on Facebook as I reference all this.
Everybody, COVID. It's COVID.
Yeah. I saw a post where it said, it showed that racism was an issue, but then it said like pedophilia and the sex trade industry and that sort is such a bigger issue, and we should be paying more attention to that. And it was really interesting because the point that was trying to be made in that is like, racism's a problem, but this one's a bigger problem.
Yeah.
Like and I was like, how can you say like your cancer is not as serious as that person's cancer? Like cancer is cancer, sin is sin.
Right.
This world has to get better, and you need to find something to be passionate about to make a difference. Because where my guilt comes in is in inaction, and my shame comes in with inaction.
Right.
There needs to be this surgence and a resurgence of when you see something that makes you feel uncomfortable. I remember the first time I've done mission work most of my life, but I went down to Haiti for the first time in 2010, right after the earthquake too. It was about 6 months after, and it was 110 degrees getting off the plane, and you were just smacked with this feeling of heavy. And Haiti was a beautiful place, but man, talk about poverty and talk about sadness and that sort. And we went and volunteered at this place called the Son of God Orphanage in Carrefour, Haiti. And 126 kids with like 5 caretakers. And they clung to me like I was the great white hope. You know what I mean? Like I was their chance out of there. I thought they just loved me. They were so happy that a volunteer came. They saw me as like their way out, which was really interesting. And when I came back, I had this guilt and this shame of like, what am I going to do, and how can I sit idly by now that I've seen this? Yeah. And that's the thing is, up until the last 30 or so days, I don't think that I was intentionally looking for this pain that you and so many other people of color have had to go through. I wasn't looking for it. And now that I've seen it, I can't sit idly by anymore. Right. Just like in Haiti 10 years ago, I couldn't sit idly by. And so I have a nonprofit that I run now called Sell a Home, Save a Child. And myself and some other realtors around the country, we've raised $2 million so far just to try to do some good. Because I can't not do anything. And I want to do something right now, Fred. Right. I don't want to give you money and be like, hey, sorry for being black, man. Here's $20. Yeah, I don't need that. Yeah. And yes, pays you well, then you're good. Yeah.
They did pay for my scholarship. They got me a scholarship. I can't complain.
Like, I want to do something.
Yeah.
Education is one. Yeah. What's my next thing? Because I'm going to take you up on that. I'm going to read more. I'm going to learn more. I'm going to understand more. Education is one. What's that next thing? Because I can't imagine I'm the only one that's like, what do I do about this?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing is contacting the people in the local communities that are being oppressed the most, right? I think a lot of times, and this is just me being completely transparent, my biggest problem with missions trips is that you spend more money to get there than you do on the people there. And so there's this idea.
I have a whole list of things that I'm frustrated with.
But it's the same idea when it comes to these areas and neighborhoods that are affected and impacted. So Pastor Cal, I don't know if you know him at Northview.
For sure.
So that's my dude. I met him 8 days ago. Literally, I met him. We had a conversation. Me, him, Officer Bloom. We were sitting down. How can we impact the community, right? Penetrate the hearts of people in the community. And Pastor Cal was like, I go down south side of Chicago every year, and do like a missions trip. And I'm like, what? Like, what part of south side of Chicago?
Yeah, they bring like 150 people. Yeah, it's a big
Inglewood. He goes to, like, literally one of the roughest parts of Chicago. They broke down all these projects, and they ostracized and made all these people come over here and literally turn it into a war zone. Because it's a lot. But anyways, he goes down there, and what he does down there is he serves people, and he tells his story, and he does this in a way that isn't about, I'm trying to save black people. It's more about like pureness in the heart. And so what I would say is, when you are contacting these activists, these organizers, these different people who have already been in the community doing these different things, including black pastors, like I get so frustrated because people talk about black on black crime. Like, what about the things going on in in your own community? And it's like, there have been black people who have literally volunteered their entire life to these issues, like never gotten paid for it, never gotten thank yous for it. If anything, their own people have been ready to slap them, kill them. You know what I'm saying? Like, when I think about coming back home and they have like Turning Your Guns, you know what I'm saying? Or Men Against Violence, or Mad Dads, all of these different organizations that are already in the community doing things to stop and to cancel.
It's far better to invest in the things that are already investing in. Yep.
They've already had their footing.
And that's the changing scope of, I think, missions and outreach and that sort is, we don't need a new organization. We need to invest in the organizations that are already doing
there.
It.
Because at the end of the day, trillions of dollars have been sent to Haiti, but have been profited by these white donors.
Mm-hmm.
And so for me, I don't know how many people grew up listening to that. There was like a commercial, and it was like, and you see just kids with ribs and bones.
Oh, that's Sarah McLachlan's In the Arms of the Angel.
Exactly. Yeah. And so it was like
that was a terrible rendition, by the way, Fred. Like,
sorry.
Stick to speaking. Yeah.
Exactly. So, but you see all these kids with the bones, and you see all of this, and then there are pictures now coming out of these people taking this video of these people, but everybody else looks completely fine, right? Mm-hmm. And so it's like they use this ethos, this emotional appeal, like serve all this money, get all this money to these people to serve these people. But in my mind, I'm like, if the person there who cared for these people, who developed and lived in this land, who never profited from helping his people, if they got that money, they would know what to do with it.
Yeah.
And so I think a lot of times we want to say, like, this is our money, we want to give it, but we want to see how you're going to do it, right? Mm-hmm. And it's like, okay, we can see how you're going to do that. And then it's like, well, I'm not sure if that's going to work. And it's like, how would you know that if you aren't occupied and embedded into those lands? That's like me going to a suburb and telling people what's not going to work out there. It's like, y'all know those lands better than I do. And so I think that a lot of times people have this idea of being like a white savior, where it's like these people clung to you because their idea of God has been pressed by whiteness, by white supremacy. When I think about white supremacy on a large scale, no Christians have a problem with this white guy being painted as Jesus when it clearly has no description of who he is in the Bible. Nobody has a problem with it. Nobody will stop that from being a thing, because white supremacy is stronger than religion. Like, white supremacy is stronger than money. White supremacy is stronger than progress. Like, people will have profit over progress every time. And it's like, that is the scariest thing for me, knowing that if somebody was to just sit down and have a conversation with an organizer, just listen, not say anything, but just listen, they will find out so many ways in which they can help. And so that's the second thing. It's just talking with the people that are already in those communities.
Yeah. So educate yourself, invest, and connect with people that are already doing these things.
Right. And not the white friend that you know that is doing things in the community because you feel safe and comfortable talking with this person. Because conversation.
we could have you go on another heater with that one. Yeah. Fred, we're about out of time. Man, I am just again, I'm impressed and grateful for you for somebody who is consistently swimming upstream and challenging the status quo. Is that for me? Is that a gift for me? No, you're going to keep it. I'm
going to keep this one, but I have one for you actually.
Really?
Danny Lukey, he's a prominent member in the society. Me and him have done so many things together. He's built me up as a mentor, as a person. He's brought me to impact this African-American Bible study event down in Atlanta. He's getting a fund together for white allies and people who want to read these books. So I will be offering these books out to people who contact me. I will give you this book for free if you need to learn, if you want to study. This is Ibram Kendi's How to Be an Anti-Racist. This book changed my life. This book, I remember I had this idea that black people couldn't be racist, right? But it was just such a Americanized idea, because outside of America, we are the dominant core culture. And so outside of here, we can be racist. And so I think a lot of times people have this excuse that, you know, black people can't be racist. Yes, we can't be systematically racist because we don't own any systems. We can't control any of that. However, we can ostracize and discriminate people. And so I think that if any of y'all need that book, there's tons of other resources and books that I have I'm willing to give out for free.
Thank you. Fred, we'll post a lot of links on how people can find you on social media and that sort. We got to go. We're plumb out of time. Dude, we're going to keep doing this. We're going to keep some conversations going.
Definitely.
And, tell your parents I say, hey, I'm glad that they watched. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
All right. So my name's Erik Hatch, Fred Edwards, Robby T here in Fargo. Thanks for taking some time to digest some tough and honest conversations.